Okay, this is a very good question. My view is that it makes sense to devote resources to forecasting oil prices. I believe that this is a rational activity, though any analyst is unlikely to produce a correct forecast except by pure luck. And I can use analogy to weather forecasting over longer time horizons. We cannot really forecast weather for the horizons longer than a few days. But still, it makes sense to engage in this activity because it has some advantages, both from the point of view of investment decisions, and also it contributes to our understanding of the market mechanics. In the case of oil markets, as in the case of weather, it's very difficult to forecast because we are dealing with highly complex systems we don't fully understand. Even more importantly, we don't have enough information to initialize the models we use. This means that we don't have enough information to feed all the necessary inputs to our models. So even if our models would be perfect, we would still did not produce good results. And it's important to recognize that a lot of information that we need to use our models doesn't exist, it's not available to us, or it's not available in the form that can be fed into the quantitative models. Also, we have to recognize that the models we use are very vulnerable to the small changes in the initial conditions. So slight change in the initial assumptions can lead to very big differences in the final results due to compounding of small changes over time. Also, we have to recognize that it is a human bias to project current conditions into the future and think within the existing conceptual framework. I can think about the forecasts or statements which were made in the 19th century regarding the maximum size of the cities. Many researchers believed that there is an upper bound on the size of any city. Why? Well, because we have no technology to remove the horse manure, and horses were used for transportation of goods and people within the city boundaries. And of course the technology changed, and the potential size of any city became much bigger. Well, why do I believe that oil forecasting is a useful exercise and not an exercise in futility? Well, it may come across as a paradox, but it reflects my philosophy regarding investment decisions, either my own personal decisions related to investing my own funds, or the decisions I was making in the past on behalf of the companies I was working for. We have to make decisions under conditions of uncertainty and imperfect, incomplete knowledge. A rational investor has to make decisions based on the assumption that a future state of the world will materialize, and he has to structure his decisions in such a way that he or his company will not be crushed if a different state of the world should materialize. And the forecasting exercise helps to identify these future states of the world and assign subjective probabilities. And a clever analyst will identify the missing information, the missing pieces of the puzzle, and will fill the gaps with his own assumptions and with a range of guesses regarding the future possible outcomes. And it also helps to think sometimes about things which seem to be unthinkable. It is very important to use imagination and to question conventional wisdoms. Well, I agree with your statements in general, but I would have to qualify my opinion in two ways. First, I think that what matters is not just the economic growth, but the quality and structure of the growth and the drivers behind the economic development. The question is whether we are going to continue economic development by building more highways and cities, or are we going to produce more clever gadgets and other products that are not energy intensive? I think that the spike in the commodity prices we could see over the last 10-15 years was related to rapid economic growth in countries like China or Brazil, but those countries were going through the stage of development which is characterized by high energy intensity and commodity intensity. As the growth over time is transformed into more qualitative growth, into growth related to domestic consumption, I think that the energy input necessary to support growth can be reduced. Another important factor, I would mention is which will become very important over time, even more important than it is today, will be growing environmental concerns. I think that growing affluence will change priorities of consumers in emerging countries from sheer survival and satisfaction of basic needs to more balanced consumption structure and quality of life. I also think that the industry cannot survive another major environmental disaster without very onerous and costly regulation. So I believe that environmental issues should be a priority for any energy company for two reasons: moral and ethical reasons, but also self-interest. The statement about availability of fossil fuels has to be qualified as well. We should ask about the cost, including full social costs which may not be fully reflected in market prices, at which increased supplies will be brought to the market. The US is going currently through an unquestionable technological revolution in production of fossil fuels. But it is important to recognize that the shale oil and shale natural gas revolution to a large extent are possible because we have higher prices of oil which support implementation of technologies which have been known for a long time but wouldn't be implemented on such a scale under the conditions of lower market prices. We could ask the following hypothetical question: should the oil prices drop, let's say, to $50 and stay at this level for a period of time, what would happen to the hectic exploration activity in the Bakken Basin, Eagle Ford in Texas, and tar sands of Alberta? I think that some investment decisions would be re-examined in a hurry under the conditions of lower market prices. A critical issue is also whether technological progress will offset over time the costs increases due to inevitable transition to exploitation of more expensive resources located in more challenging locations. I think that speaking about shales, we have to recognize one property of the specific geological formation. The shales are anisotropic, and then this is a word that should be written in flaming letters on the wall of any executive in the energy industry. The anisotropic property of shales means that the characteristic of shale rocks and the productivity of shale rock formations varies across different spatial directions. And this means that typically when we start exploring a new area, we can identify sweet spots, the spots which are characterized by higher productivity, better production results, lower costs. And the geologists and engineers in this industry are very good in identifying such sweet spots. What may happen over time is that the production and exploration companies will have to migrate to worse locations, and the costs will go up and productivity will decrease. Unfortunately, the industry has sometimes a tendency to project initial results into the future and assume that high levels of productivity will continue forever. So everything depends on whether we'll be becoming more smarter, or whether the geological characteristics of shale formations we will not be offset by improved technologies, by new inventions and innovations in production and exploration of oil and natural gas. Well, also I would like to mention, another very important aspect of the recent developments in the production of oil and natural gas in the United States. These developments have huge geopolitical consequences. I think that energy security of the North American continent has improved dramatically over the last few years. It remains to be seen if we will see the same developments elsewhere. The conditions in other countries are not necessarily as supportive of shale developments as the conditions existing in the United States. We are talking about differences in geology, we are talking about differences in property and mineral rights, we are talking about differences in water availability, we are talking about different legal systems, and everything adds up to much different conditions than the conditions we have in the United States. I would say that in many ways, the US is blessed with respect to availability of very significant sources of energy, which will contribute to both productivity of the US economy and the ability of the US economy to compete. Whether other countries are equally blessed remains to be seen. I was born in Poland. Poland has huge shale resources, but unfortunately over the last few months a number of companies engaged in exploratory drilling in Poland have pulled out because the results of initial tests were highly disappointing. We'll see what's going to happen in the future.